Good morning, everybody. It's Sunday, the 25th of November. I'm here in Brussels where this historic summit is taking place. We're going to look at what's been agreed. And by the way, it took the leaders 38 minutes to agree the withdrawal agreement and the future political declaration. I've never been to a summit where there was less anticipation. Everything was stitched up beforehand. So we'll talk about what's going on. We'll take the press conferences live as they play out during this programme. We'll take your view, too, on whether you think Mrs May should be backed. And this comes at the same time when Theresa May sends out an open letter to the country. I'm reminded, of course, the last time that happened, it was Mr Cameron's document that he sent to all of our houses. Well, now there's an open letter from Mrs May. If you want to read the contents, go to lbc.co.uk. So that will dominate our conversation this morning, but we'll also talk a bit about France, where violent protests took place in Paris yesterday, where there's a big divide, clearly, between town and country. And I'll also tell you why today actually is the real 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, not as you thought back on November the 11th. So I'm going to go straight to the council building, and for those of you watching us on Periscope or watching us on Facebook, that's the building immediately behind me. That's where all the leaders are right now as we speak, and where I was earlier this morning. I have to say, for me, it's a very odd, strange day. As I arrived and went through security, people were saying to me things like, well, it's a very sad day, it's a bad day that the UK's leaving, and that's what we're all here to discuss. Others said to me, you must be really pleased. And I'm thinking to myself, I spent 25 years battling for us to leave the European Union. Now there's an agreement that we are going to do so in a few short months' time. And yet, I'm not in the mood to pop open any corks, because I think the terms upon which we're leaving are simply shocking. Let's go straight to the council building and speak to LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood. Theo, they've agreed it then.
And you would have missed it, Nigel. 38 minutes from sitting down to a final deal on the withdrawal agreement, the terms, of course, on which we are leaving the European Union, and then the political declaration on the future relationship between Britain and the European Union. Both, Donald Tusk said in a very short tweet, have been signed off, and we're now just awaiting for Mr Tusk and the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, to hold a press conference, as is the form. They go first, and then it will be up to Theresa May to answer questions from journalists here inside the Justice Lipsius building. Very, very quickly, it was always going to be rubber stamped. There was pushback yesterday, of course, on Gibraltar. Worth mentioning that, because the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said he wasn't prepared for the deal to go ahead, although he didn't have a right of veto unless Madrid would take part in future negotiations on Gibraltar and its sovereignty. Sir Tim Barrow, the British ambassador to the European Union, gave that in a short written statement, and so we could move forward to today, and the deal is signed, sealed and delivered all before lunchtime, and the European leaders can return to their country residences.
OK, Theo, come back to us, please, as and when the press conferences begin. That was Theo Usherwood, and we will listen to Mr Juncker, and we'll listen to Monsieur Barnier, and indeed we'll listen to Mrs May. So it's all been agreed. All the things that we've been debating on this midweek show, version of this show, have been agreed. And I just want to point out to you, again, lbc.co.uk, and there you can read the text of Mrs May's open letter to the country. There's nothing terribly surprising in it. She says, we will take back control of our borders. We will take back control of our money. And we'll take back control of our laws, ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. I have to say, folks, that we will only take back control of our borders if the EU at some point in the future agree. Taking back control of our money, well, I think we're committed to giving away about 60 billion on this deal. And as for taking back control of our laws and ending ECJ jurisdiction, it's perfectly clear, actually, in the text of the document, that the European Court of Justice will continue to administer over trade disputes. My view, very simply, is that this is the worst deal in history, and I really do want to see this voted down in Parliament. But tell me, as the Prime Minister makes a direct, open appeal to you, when she says to you, get behind the Brexit deal because it's for the good of the country, I'm asking you, are you now going to back the Prime Minister? And if you think, yeah, actually, this is a time for unity, she's got the best deal that was possible, call 0345 6060 973. Maybe you're tired of endless empty promises, particularly on immigration, from a woman who was Home Secretary, made these promises and didn't deliver. That's how you feel, text to 84850. Or maybe like me, you think it's the worst deal in history and it has to be voted down, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, Facebookers, you can comment there too as you watch the show and see the building behind me. So it's all smiles from the leaders. It's all been agreed. I have to say, I think Barnier will feel that he's done pretty well. He's boxed Britain pretty much into a corner, the Irish backstop being the means by which most of this was done. But still, they're still pretty sad that the UK is leaving, I have to say that. Now, listen, you can go elsewhere. You can go onto all sorts of radio stations and all sorts of television programmes this morning if you want, where predominantly it'll be journalists talking to journalists. This is the one place where you, the public, get your say. So let's get cracking. Let's go to Sean, a new caller from Notting Hill. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice to know that you're back in the fight again. I was a bit worried for a while there.
Oh, no, I've never given up, Sean. Don't worry about that.
No, but it seemed like it was going to go AWOL, the whole Brexit deal. This whole Brexit deal is a complete stitch-up, because the Brexit vote was never about trade, it was never about deals, it was never about finance at all. The Brexit vote was about independence and being governed by people who are, in theory, accountable, which in Europe, you're not.
Yep.
Okay? So all we've had is this hogwash that's been dragged in front of us, one red herring after another. Now, I remember Simon Heffer saying in the lead-up to the Brexit vote, he said that if he thought in 6 years' time he would be boiling grass to feed his family, he would still vote Brexit, because there's something much bigger at stake than just finance.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Independence and sovereignty.
Absolutely, it's about being a proper nation. I agree with that entirely. So this deal, sum it up in a word, Sean, for me.
Garbage.
Garbage. Thank you very much indeed. There we are. Well, you couldn't get plainer than that from Sean in Notting Hill. Let's see what Susan, a new caller from Middlesbrough, makes of it. Susan, good morning to you.
Good morning, yeah. For the first time in my life, I voted Conservative because I believed in her, and I now wouldn't trust the woman to tell me the time.
Really?
Yeah, I just think it's just been one U-turn, one back shuffle, and all she's interested in is us not leaving EU.
But Susan, the Prime Minister is telling you that she's taking back control of our laws, our borders, our money. Do you feel she's not telling the truth?
Yes. Well, I mean, the deal itself, I mean, I'm not an academic, but from what I hear, from what's in it, I mean, there's this backstop, and that we have to wait for them to give us permission to leave, is absolutely... Well,
yes, it's like voluntarily going into prison, Susan, isn't it?
Yeah,
and hoping that the warder will be kind when we decide we finally want to leave.
And the other thing, Nigel, is what I don't understand is how can she go and sign something when we don't know if the country agrees with it.
Well, Susan, the next stage of this, of course, is it's going to get put to the Houses of Parliament, and at the moment there are 90 or so Conservatives say they're going to oppose it. We're not sure at all what Labour are going to do. Would you like to see Parliament reject this, Susan?
Yes.
OK, smashing. Susan, thank you. Well,
okay.
Susan, not in the least bit impressed. And interesting, isn't it? When Susan said it's the first time in her life she'd voted Conservative. You know, Mrs May did, when she came in as Prime Minister, especially when she gave that Lancaster House speech, and in her manifesto, she did give the impression to Brexit voters that although she'd voted the other way, she completely understood what we were doing. And yet now we get Philip Hammond basically saying this deal is to make both Leavers and Remainers happy. Well, if you try and please all of the people all of the time, you end up pleasing pretty much nobody, in my experience. Let's go to Julia, a new caller from Birmingham. Good morning, Julia.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. So great to speak to you.
Good to speak to you.
I wanted to feel completely free when we got this Brexit. I still feel like I'm going to be a prisoner. I think it is appalling. She just lies, and more lies.
They're very strong words for a Sunday morning, Julia.
It is, yeah, but, the time when we needed a very strong Prime Minister, another Churchill. We've got the weakest, feeblest Prime Minister we have ever had. I think it's appalling.
Julia, I have to say, I think she's the worst Prime Minister I've seen in my lifetime, and just about the most duplicitous too.
And I think if she goes on like this, there's trouble in France. I think there will be, unfortunately, I hope it doesn't happen, but from people in the Midlands, when I'm out and about shopping, people are so angry, I think in the end they will get out and do something.
Well, Julia...
I hope not, but I don't think she thinks that she can tread all over us, and we're just going to keep taking it. And so lies and lies. So it's just appalling.
You sense people are really genuinely angry, Julia?
Yeah, very angry. I mean, I live just outside a little town. You visited Dudley.
Yes, I know.
And when you go around Dudley, people are absolutely, just really angry.
Well, I hope they're able to...
They're fed up with it.
I hope they're able to manifest that anger in ways that are non-violent. I really do. Julia, thank you very much indeed for your call. Anne on Twitter says, with most of Europe having no money and being broke, she had a chance. We are the second highest net payer, and she has failed big time to play the best hand she had. Not just that, Anne, but also they sell us 100 billion euros worth of goods more every year than we sell them. We had some great cards to play. We just never chose to even attempt it because the Prime Minister, and she signalled it at that speech in Florence, actually wanted to opt back in to most of the European Union. She wanted to give us Brexit in name only. And when I heard Angela Merkel, I was just a few yards away from her a couple of weeks ago, when Merkel said Mrs May wants to stay part of Europe, never a truer word spoken. You're listening to a Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, live from here in Brussels, and it's now 10:15. Well, the shortest European summit in history is over. 38 minutes from start to finish, and that includes going through translators and everything else. It's done, it's agreed. The withdrawal agreement and the future political declaration. It's now press conferences with leaders and Mr Juncker and Mr Barnier, and no doubt Donald Tusk as well. And all of this at the same time that Theresa May's now sent an open letter to you, the people of this country, and she's urging you to get behind her Brexit deal for the good of the country. And if you want to see the text of that letter, go to lbc.co.uk. Now, so far in this show, you've all been coming on and been very negative about the Prime Minister. Surely someone has got a nice word to say about the Prime Minister and this deal. I'm going to go now to Ian Duncan-Smith, former Conservative Party leader. Ian, good morning.
Good morning to you, Nigel.
Well, the Prime Minister tells us that with this deal, we take back control of our borders, of our money, and of our laws. It sounds very impressive, doesn't it?
Well, that sounds impressive, and that's what people voted for. I think about 80%, 85% of the public voted at the last election for parties that pledged to do just that. The problem, as you know only too well, with this is that ever since December last year, we have basically just kind of given the EU what they asked for. So, last December, we gave them the backstop, which is a disaster, and 39 billion. And we said that was because it would unlock the trade discussions and we'd have those complete alongside everything else by the time we voted. Well, they never went to trade. They just asked for more. We've ended up in a terrible mess. And the result is now we're trapped in an agreement, a withdrawal agreement. And this is the point, two parts, withdrawal agreement and, of course, the future relationship. The future relationship is just a piece of paper at the moment with some ideas on it. The withdrawal agreement is the legally binding text that they're signing today. And that, I think, is quite devastating. I mean, we'll be bound into a backstop if we haven't completed any other alternative arrangements. That means Northern Ireland treated separately, us in the customs union, them pretty much de facto in the single market, adjudicated by the Court of Justice. So take back our laws, not really, because any future EU migrants will be handled for some considerable period of time by the Court of Justice, plus a whole bunch of other measures. But the thing that really upsets me about this now is the backstop. We promised that we would not treat Ireland separately, and we are going to do it. And the thing that really worries me, and I'll finish on this, is that we are assured by the Prime Minister that the EU doesn't really want us in this backstop, okay? Apparently we don't want to be in this backstop, and we're going to do everything we can to avoid it. The Chancellor says it's a load of old rubbish, the backstop, and the Irish have said no matter what is agreed or not agreed, there will never be a hard border. So my question is, why in hell's name, then, are we in a backstop? Why do we need this? And the answer is, because actually they really do want us in the backstop, and this is just a lot of waffle.
Yeah, and that was the past we sold in December a year ago. So, Ian, you will oppose this in the House of Commons, yeah?
Yeah, unless they've disguised from us a major change to the thing that we drop the backstop and we get rid of the Court of Justice, but I don't think that's going to happen.
No, nothing has. I can promise you one thing: nothing has changed here in Brussels this morning. Ian, there's one problem, isn't it? There is one dilemma that you face, and indeed, when it comes to the European Parliament, I'm going to face exactly the same dilemma because the European Parliament has the final say on this. If you vote against this deal and this deal fails, is there not a risk that Parliament chooses or is allowed to open up the EU Withdrawal Act and to put in an amendment of some kind that suspends Article 50 or maybe even takes us towards a second referendum?
Well, okay, so that is always a possibility. So let's deal with the Article 50 point. So our government does not have the executive power to postpone the Article 50 because we bound it into legislation when we passed the Act.
Yep.
So we now have an Act of Parliament that has a date on it for our departure. So we would have to go in and amend the Act to be able to allow the government to extend it. So there would be a major row in Parliament about that, and people would see that there was some kind of a betrayal taking place here. So it would become very obvious. It wouldn't just be able to coast through. The second bit about the referendum, for a second referendum to go through, Parliament would have to vote a bill through, a new Act of Parliament to grant another referendum. The government has always said they won't do that. We have said we won't do it. But to do it, I don't think they've even got the time now, because by the time we hit December, if you want to take an Act through like that, with all the consequences that take place, there's every chance that it won't even be ready by the time we've left on the 29th of March. So the key thing with these things is that to just block off all this nonsense and simply say, people didn't vote for this and they didn't vote for another referendum. What they voted for was to leave.
Yep.
And if we deliver that, then they will be happy. If we don't deliver it, then we will see the consequences at the next election. And actually, by the way, there needs to be a focus on Labour because they're all over the place on this as well. Had they been clear about this, I don't think the government would ever have gone down this road. So the answer is we have to just stop it dead in its tracks and make the government go back and negotiate again.
OK, thank you very much indeed. That was Ian Duncan-Smith, pretty clear in his reasons why he is opposed to this deal, the deal that I've called the worst deal in history. Now, surely somebody out there thinks it's a good deal. Somebody out there must think Theresa May's doing a great job. Somebody out there must agree that it's time for us to get behind her Brexit deal for the good of the country. 03456060973. Let's go to Plymouth and speak to Peter, a new caller. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you, and thank you for having me on.
Not a bit. So what do you make of it all, Peter? Should we back the Prime Minister?
Depends what we want to back her into, I suppose. But no, of course we shouldn't. What I'd like to know is, Nigel, where the hell have all the Conservative MPs been while this charade has been going on? And we've known that this is the likely outcome for at least a year. Every time one of her negotiators finds out what the truth is, they have to resign. And we are in, it's a complete debacle. She couldn't negotiate her way out of a paper bag. It's taken 2 years to produce something that took 38 minutes to sign off, which obviously means that the EU know it's a deal in their favour and against us. I mean, what else is there to say, Nigel? She's got to go, and I'm amazed that the party hasn't got rid of her yet.
No, well, Jacob Rees-Mogg stood out there, didn't he, and encouraged everyone to write the letters, and they just didn't do so. Peter, thank you very much. Peter, I'm going to move on. Going to go to Morris in Edgware, who I've spoken to before. Morris, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So,
you were one of the promulgators of this country leaving, weren't you?
Absolutely.
Yes, right. Where are yours, Mr. Gove's, Mr. Johnson's, Mr. Corbyn's, now you mentioned Mr. Rees-Mogg, where is your collective plan against what Mrs. May and her advisors, because no one person can do it all on their own, and her advisors, where is your and your colleagues' alternative plan against what Mrs. May has come up with? Where is it?
Fine. Well, there are two very simple options, Maurice, although time, of course, is getting terribly short. I have, for 25 years, advocated a simple free trade agreement, what we would now call Canada Plus. I've always thought that was the right thing to do, Maurice, and I've always thought it was in the interest of the EU to do it as well. Failing that, if that's not possible now because of time, I go back to the phrase that I coined in the referendum: no deal is better than a bad deal, and I think no deal, leaving on WTO terms, with obviously negotiations on border issues, etc., that, Maurice, is infinitely preferable to this deal, and into the bargain will save 60 billion quid.
Yeah, but the thing is you still have not come up with your colleagues with a plan.
I just did.
Regardless of what you say, a good deal or a bad deal, where is your plan?
Well, there's something called the World Trade Organization, Maurice. 90% of global trade takes place under those rules. How's that for a plan?
Sorry, what was that again?
I said, how's that for a plan? 90% of world trade takes place on those rules. What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is this, that when you said, for example, that Mrs. May said she wants to stay in Europe. Yes, in Europe, she wants to stay in Europe, but not necessarily in the European Union, which, as you've heard today, mentioned it should be reformed. Why hasn't it been reformed?
It never will be reformed, Maurice, because the government of Europe is unelected, it's appointed, and once something becomes European law, there's nothing the voters of Europe can do to change any of it. Maurice, let me just put this back.
Nigel, why do 28 nations' governments agree to all this nonsense that comes out of Brussels? Why?
Well, actually, if you look at Mrs. Merkel, she spoke on Friday with a sign behind her saying Mehr Europa, more Europe. You've got Macron pushing for more Europe. They want a finance minister because Maurice, they're building a United States of Europe. It's been their project for decades. That's what they believe. And if you listen to the Mr. Verhofstadts of this world, the EU Parliament's negotiator in this, they want basically for the nation states to disappear and to be absorbed into this new superstate. That's what they want.
Why doesn't everyone, the nations, the people, not the people at the top, because they can be toppled, they're not there all the time. The people of the world, or the 28 nations, we should all be standing up and saying, no more of this nonsense. We've got our own governments. We're going to rule ourselves.
Well, I think to some extent, Maurice, this is beginning to happen, isn't it? Because that's why you got Brexit, and that's why you've now got a different Italian government, and things are changing. Maurice, I thank you. After the news, we're going to go to Paris, speak to LBC's Peter Allen to understand the extent of the violence that took place there, and to examine just how much trouble that former golden boy, Emmanuel Macron, is really in. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, live from the European Summit in Brussels. It's now 10:30. Well, it's all smiles in Brussels from the European leaders as a summit concludes in 38 minutes with agreement on the UK's withdrawal agreement and the future political declaration. Mrs. May writes an open letter to you in the country, asking you for support, saying, get behind the Brexit deal for the good of the country. If you want to read the text of that letter, lbc.co.uk. But before we get back to that, the golden boy of the European project, in fact, the man who was going to reverse all the terrible things that had happened with Brexit and Trump and growing populism in Italy, was Emmanuel Macron. That new party En Marche stormed to power, and here was a new young European leader who believes in European army, a European state, and he really was, as I say, the golden boy. But my goodness me, a lot appears to have gone wrong in a very short space of time, and in particular, some pretty unpleasant riots in Paris yesterday. I'm going straight to Paris to speak to Peter Allen, LBC's correspondent. Peter, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So just explain to us, we know it's to do with fuel, what exactly has sparked off this wave of protest?
Effectively, as you say, it's fuel prices. They've gone up by about 25% this year. Wow. And, of course, there's effects. Remember, France is a huge rural communities all over France. A lot of people living in suburbs around Paris. They absolutely rely on their Renaults and Citroens to get everywhere. And with these huge rises, they're having to sell cars, they're not being able to travel. And they see it as indicative of a government that really isn't much interested in poorer people, much more interested in the elites who live in Paris, Toulouse, Nice, the big prosperous cities, but not so much in what they call the forgotten France over here, the traditional rural communities.
Did the president do this in the name of green policy? What was the real reason for this? I mean, 25% is a huge increase, isn't it?
It's a huge increase. A lot of that, of course, is to do with the rise in the price of crude oil, which is, of course, beyond the government's control. But his main reason was green policies. He wants to abolish petrol and diesel engines completely by about 2040. That's all linked to the Paris climate trade agreement. And he wants to bring hybrid cars, etc., etc. So it's really green policy. That's the main reason.
Yeah, well, clearly there's a town v country split here. So tell us exactly what happened in Paris yesterday.
Really was quite extraordinary. The Champs-Élysées, which is normally sacred, I've witnessed lots of riots in Paris, but they never go anywhere near the Champs. It's seen as the most beautiful avenue in France. It's very close to the presidential palace, great symbol of France. You've got the Arc de Triomphe there, where all the invading armies used to march under. But it's a place that normally the rioters wouldn't get anywhere near. Yesterday, they started fighting on the Champs about 10 o'clock in the morning, and they were still at it by about 8 o'clock at night. Absolutely incredible scenes. They were smashing up the pavements to use as missiles against the police, who were responding with tear gas and water cannon. It went on for hours and hours and hours. Absolutely extraordinary.
And Macron's rating, I mean, we used to joke about the previous president, Hollande, having the lowest approval rating of any French president in history. Now, I'm told that Emmanuel Macron's numbers are getting towards Hollande levels.
It's not quite there yet, Nigel. I think the lowest we got with Monsieur Hollande was about 4%, very close to zero. But Mr. Macron's about 25% now. But he's an ambitious man. Who knows? He might get even lower. We'll see.
Okay. Peter, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Well, how interesting. You know, horrible to see the violence, but that divide between town and country. And the truth is, if you're a young person living in a big city, you don't need a car. In fact, actually, it's a pain in the neck having a car. You've got to park it and pay for everything. There's congestion charge in London, for example, to pay. So you go around by public transport, or friends with cars give you lifts at weekends. But if you live out in the country, and bear in mind that France is about 2.5 times the size of the United Kingdom, you need a car to go shopping, to get the kids to school and all the rest of it. And it's often struck me that green policies, high taxes on diesel, petrol, fuel, they can be quite popular for an urban population, but very unpopular for a rural, small-town population. Fascinating. We'll watch those developments very, very carefully. I get on Twitter, the fact we have to convince people to be in control of our own country is ridiculous in itself. Well, I thought that 25 years ago. David says, if they think the populist uprising of the last couple of years has been significant, it will be nothing if we don't get the proper Brexit we voted for, says David in Guildford. David, lots of people say that, and lots of callers tell me there is real anger out there in the country. We'll just have to see. Remember, we're not like the French. You know, what happened yesterday, and Peter Allen made clear, it was extraordinary in terms of its duration, but it's quite a common thing in France for smallholders to block the roads, or for fishermen to block the ferry port at Calais. They kind of do this in France. We have in our history done things like this. We just don't do it very often. Sean says by text, Nigel, have you noticed how this whole thing has been played out like a script? The drama always builds and then falls to nothing. It's not a good day. Theresa May is just an EU pawn. Chris feels a bit angrier. What an absolute stitch-up. 40 minutes to agree a deal, but months and months of toing and froing. We want to be an independent country on our own. I really hope it becomes no deal. We've just been held to ransom by these idiots in the EU. Oh, they're not idiots. Chris, you call them what you like, they're not idiots. They've actually handled this masterfully. They must be laughing behind our backs. No, Chris, my experience in Brussels and Strasbourg is they're not laughing, they're laughing to our face. That's how I feel about it. Someone tell me I've got this awfully wrong. Someone tell me Mrs. May has done the best she possibly could. Someone tell me we need to get behind her for the good of the country, as she implores us to do in her letter, which you can read on lbc.co.uk. David is a new caller from Crewe. Good morning, David.
Yes, good morning, Nigel. Good to speak to you. It's very clear to me, and probably to most people, that many UK politicians are trying to con and cheat the people of this country who voted democratically to leave the EU. It's taken this country 2 years to get absolutely nowhere with Brexit, and I'll tell you in a few minutes what the problem is and what the solution is. How's about that?
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to fold my arms and listen. This sounds terrific. This sounds terrific, David.
Okay, here's the problem. It's clear what the people voted for in the referendum. Every single major player on all sides, Leave, Remain, Tory, Labour, whatever, they said that if we voted to leave, we'd be leaving all the structures of the EU, including the customs union, the single market, we'd take control of our borders, all that kind of stuff. So the problem isn't with Brexit. The problem is with the politicians who are failing to carry out the wishes of the people who elected them into office. And this is the thing, Nigel. Too many politicians, they're putting their own personal slant on what they think the people voted for. They're confusing the what with the how, really. And
isn't the truth, David? They don't accept what the people voted for. That's the truth.
In life, when you want something, firstly, you decide what you want. Secondly, you decide how you get it. Brexit's no different. The first step, decide what we want. That was taken by the people in the referendum, and it was to leave the EU.
Yep.
The second step, how to leave the EU, is for the politicians to sort out. But the next point, and this is a critical point as far as I'm concerned, the second step, how to leave the EU, that should not violate or be at the expense of the first step, that we are leaving the EU. Otherwise, it threatens democracy. And this is the con. Because Theresa May's plan is the only plan currently being considered by the government, and because it doesn't look like it will pass the Commons, many Remainers think that gives them some sort of green light to say that the only option is for the people to have another referendum. It's a con, it's disingenuous, and it really does make a mockery of democracy. And again, another example, yesterday, Theresa May was on the radio saying it's a deal that, quote, it's good for the economy, good for trade, good for jobs. Well, do you know what, Theresa? The people didn't vote for a deal that's good for the economy.
So what are we going to do, David?
Sorry?
So what are we going to do?
The solution is simple. We don't need a general election. We don't need a referendum. We need the Tory party to find a bit of backbone, replace Theresa May with someone who's committed to Brexit and who will carry out the wishes of the British people.
Do you know what, David? I've been saying that since July. They haven't yet done it. I thank you for your call and for your passion. In a minute, I'll tell you why. Today is the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. But for now, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, live from a summit here in Brussels, and it's 10:45. Well, it's all done and dusted. Yes, this is not going to be what used to be called a 2 or 3 shirt summit that goes on till 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. 38 minutes it took to agree the withdrawal agreement and the future political declaration. And Mrs. May seems pretty happy with things, looking pretty chipper this morning, I thought. And she urges us in an open letter to the country to get behind the deal for the good of the country. And I'm asking you, are you going to back Mrs. May? Before I get back to that, you thought the end of the First World War, of course, was on the 11th of November. Well, in Europe it was, but almost unknown to anybody is, in fact, fighting went on in Africa, active battles still being fought on the 13th of November, and it wasn't until the 25th of November, 1918, that the leader of the German forces in Africa, General von Lettow-Vorbeck, signed the act that ended the war in Africa too. The armistice reached Africa on this day 100 years ago. And maybe from our perspective, just worth thinking of the sheer number of Ghanaians, Nigerians, South Africans, even people from countries like Sierra Leone, the Gambia, who were fighting on our side. About 100,000 of them were killed. And I think it's a forgotten part, perhaps in some ways, of the war, active warfare in Africa during World War I, including naval battles taking place on some of the Great Lakes. And there are, lots of these families from these countries who feel an extraordinary connection with our country because of this shared history. 100 years ago today, that the First World War genuinely ended. Let's get back to Mrs. May. Let's get back to this deal. Are we going to back the Prime Minister? Daniel is a new caller from Hendon. Daniel, are you going to back the Prime Minister?
Absolutely not, Nigel. You are totally spot on. the most duplicitous and useless prime minister we've had in the history of our country, and there's been quite a few of them.
Bit of competition out there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been fuming for a few weeks already, and then last night, again, as we suspected, it got even worse when she sold Gibraltar down the river, basically. This will come out. The Spanish Prime Minister's secured an agreement where I'm pretty sure down the line, when we start to negotiate the agreement, that Gibraltar's sovereignty will come up. So it's a disgrace.
Daniel, I think at this stage it's to do with any future trade deals. We'd almost need Spain's permission for Gibraltar to be included. But hey, Daniel, whatever this lot asks for, we just say yes, don't we?
Absolutely, we do. And do we have something like the 25th Amendment in the UK?
No.
Because I think she's lost her marbles, to be quite honest. She will do anything, and she will do anything to get that agreement signed.
Daniel, explain to people what the 25th Amendment is.
The 25th Amendment in America is when the serving president is incapacitated or being taken ill or suffers, what should we say, a mental breakdown.
Or is seen to be unfit to continue, yeah. No,
seen to be unfit to office and can be replaced by the vice president.
So, Daniel, what do you want to see happen next?
I want to see Parliament reject the deal, which I'm sure they will, by a huge majority. The letters go in. She will be finished, I reckon, after that.
And then that takes us through to Christmas, or maybe even runs into the new year. What do we do between then and the 29th of March, Daniel? I mean, time is getting a bit tight, isn't it?
Well, we have to find a new leader rapidly as possible. And then we have to tell the European Union there's going to be no deal. We're going to leave on world trade terms, and let them stew on that.
And I have to say, Daniel, that I think will be the only option, because the one message that is coming out of here this morning, and I've not talked about it yet, is everybody here is saying there is no change to this. That's it. This is not up for negotiation again, and they're all saying that pretty loudly and clearly. So if that's the case, Daniel, then a negotiated no deal would be the only option. Daniel, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Mill Hill and speak to Regina. Regina, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel.
And welcome.
Good morning, thank you. This is coming from a purely non-political point of view, because quite frankly, I've been lost in the mire with the whole thing until it started. I feel desperately sorry for Mrs. May, and I know people are going to be screaming at their radios. But the poor woman was dumped in the middle of it all. And I just feel it's not just her. She's got a band of ministers who, quite frankly, are a load of bullies. And all those men at the EU. There are very few women. And I'm not a feminist particularly, but I just feel desperately sorry for the woman. She is doing her best. And as she is Prime Minister, it is our duty to stand behind her. And it's all been done now. Thank goodness for that. Let us stand behind her, and I'm sure she will do the best that she possibly can. I know you disagree with me.
Well, no, I mean, I would say this to you, Regina. I mean, you say she's been dumped into this. She wasn't a conscript. She wasn't put in as Prime Minister against her will. She chose to do this. And the difficulty, I'd put this back to you. The difficulty is this. She's trying to please everybody. Philip Hammond made that very clear yesterday. She wants to please Leavers and she wants to please Remainers. And in doing so, I think she's signing us up to sort of halfway house, never, never land, which really doesn't make anybody very happy.
Well, whatever happened, whether we stayed or now we've gone, it's going to be the same outcome. Somebody is not going to be happy. The majority of people are not going to be happy with whatever has happened. Whatever she did would have been the wrong thing.
Okay. Well, no, I know leadership is not easy, but there's been a bit of polling out over the last 48 hours conducted by Lord Ashcroft. And when people are asked, do they believe that the Brexit deal agreed between the government and the European Union honours the result of the referendum, we find figures that really are, pretty astonishing. I mean, basically amongst Conservative voters, it's down to about 15%. 64% of Conservative voters think her deal does not honour the result. 40% of Labour voters thinks her deal does not honour the result. So there is a lot of had she gone for a clean Brexit, 52% of the country would have said hooray. At the moment, her figures are dire, Regina.
Yes, I understand that. But it is what it is now. It's a fait accompli. We have to back her. We have to back Mrs. May.
Okay.
And that's all I'm going to say about it.
You've made the point very passionately, and I thank you as a new caller for coming on and making it. Thank you very much indeed. Well, strong passion there. And, that point of view, there are a lot of people who feel sorry for her. I know that, but I don't want to feel sorry for our leader. I don't necessarily even need to like our leader. I just want a leader that leads. I'm going to Benidorm to speak to Belinda, a new caller. Good morning, Belinda.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm not really that happy, am I?
No, me neither. I have 2 words for Mrs. May. No way, Mrs. May.
Right.
Oh, we just can't go a deal like that, can we? We have just got to do a no deal. We have to stick 2 fingers up at the EU and say, that's it. We're not doing this.
Okay, right, fine. Simple as that. No deal is the only solution now, is it, yeah?
It is the only solution.
Belinda, you've made the point as succinctly as anybody that's ever called this show. Thank you. I'm back over to the building. Theo is ready. Theo Usherwood.
I'm in the Justice Lipsius press briefing room in front of the podiums, Nigel.
Yeah.
We don't have anybody in front of them waiting to speak to us, but in a few moments' time, Donald Tusk is going to come out alongside Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the Commission, and Michel Barnier, the Chief Brexit negotiator, to outline what has exactly been agreed. It's starting to fill up. And then this press conference will probably last 15 to 20 minutes, and then it'll be upstairs to room 2.0, which is where Mrs. May always holds her press conferences for the British media and others, in fact, if they want to come along and ask her a question as well. And she'll be outlining exactly what she thinks or why she thinks that this deal is a good deal for Britain.
Okay. Stay close to us, Theo. That was Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, who is waiting for these press conferences. Jim says to me by text, the unseemly haste with which the EU signed off Mrs. May's leave-in-name-only deal says it all. They snatched her hand off for it. Well, why wouldn't they? Because, you shake hands with the British Prime Minister and there's 60 billion quid there. I mean, it's worth doing, isn't it? Amy says by text, I agree that the politicians are seriously underestimating the levels of anger outside of London. They ignore it at their peril. I voted Remain, but above all, I believe in democracy. And this deal is a slap in the face of every British citizen. Someone needs to step up and actually get us out of the EU. Well, the Prime Minister will say we are leaving the treaty if this deal gets agreed on March 29th next year at 11 p.m. And she's right about that. The trouble is, it really is Brexit in name only. Well, folks, the deal has been agreed, and Mrs. May will come back to the UK tonight. You've already been told about the open letter she sent to the country. It's there on lbc.co.uk, and we now enter the next and perhaps even more dramatic phase of this whole Brexit saga. Parliament will vote on this within the next couple of weeks. Do you think this deal gets through Parliament? If you think no, they're going to reject it, call 0345 6060 973. If you think, yeah, Mrs. May's a winner, text to 84850. And maybe you agree with me. It must be rejected. Tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Watch us on Facebook. Comment there too. We're live at the European Summit here in Brussels. Well, the press conferences have begun here in Brussels, and we will keep you up to date with what is said, find out whether there are any more nasty surprises, but I don't think so. I think this was all done and dusted. I always thought this summit would not amount to much in terms of drama, but there we are. Bob says by text, May did the best she could do, but is it the best that could be done? That's a good question, Bob. I believe the answer's no. I think ever since that speech in Florence, she basically wanted to opt back into virtually every aspect of the European Union, but felt she had to get us out of the treaty to keep her so-called promise to the British people. I don't think it's good enough. Now, Tony Blair is, of course, never, ever far away from commenting on these things, and he has said within the last hour that another referendum was the only way you're going to unite the country. Really, Tony? I suspect if we're forced to vote again, you might see anger, political anger, unlike we've ever seen before. He does say, that the deal put forward was seen as unacceptable by both sides and as only united people in opposition to it. Well, those figures I read you out earlier showing you, that big numbers of Conservative voters and big numbers of Labour voters believe this deal does not honour the Brexit result would suggest that is true. And Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said that Mrs May's plea to the public for support, and she said they shouldn't do so because almost nothing in this desperate letter is true. Oh, gosh. I agree with the leader of the SNP. But have a lie down, I think, and a quick rub with the sporting life. Hey, I really do not believe when she talks about taking back control of our laws, our money, our borders, it's simply not true. And I thought Ian Duncan Smith made that point very, very clearly. So, folks, do you think this will get through the House of Commons? Should it get through the House of Commons? Should the Prime Minister be supported or not? James is a new caller from Southgate. Good morning, James.
Morning, Nigel. How are you?
Well, I'm all right, not very happy, but I should be standing up and cheering and going to the pub downstairs from where I'm broadcasting and getting a cork out of something at midday and saying, isn't it great? We've agreed with the other leaders the terms upon which we're leaving. But it just doesn't feel like that. No, absolutely not. Firstly, Nigel, let me say this. What a service you performed for this country. In amidst all of the career politicians, I sincerely think that you are the most significant politician this country has seen since Margaret Thatcher. And for me, this decision is like leaving the gold standard in 1931, or it should be like that, Nigel. And yet we do not have the ability to strike free trade deals until at least 2021. And this backstop that we keep talking about, let's call it what it is, keeping the United Kingdom in the single market. The European Court of Justice will still have jurisdiction over this country. I just don't think this deal is worth the paper it's written on. James, let me ask you, how can the Prime Minister, and I'm urging everybody, go to lbc.co.uk and it'll take you 2 minutes, read the letter. But in this letter, in this plea, James, that she makes to the British people for support, she says, and we will take back control of our laws by ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK. Now, she words that carefully, doesn't she? Because actually the European Court of Justice will continue to have say over trade disputes and, without doubt, migrants' rights. How can she say one thing and do the other and keep a straight face? I know, I simply don't understand it, and I have to agree with you that I do agree with the leader of the SNP, which is not something I often do. First for me. Nigel, let us not forget the benefits of Brexit. Let this country be a trading nation once again. Why on earth do we put up the common external tariff in the customs union to people outside of the European Union? This is an outdated dirigiste model. Let us break free and start trading with the globe like we once did in the 19th century. I think this is a massive, massive missed opportunity. And Jacob Rees-Mogg has said that it will actually bring down the cost of living for the poorest in this country, which is something that the Labour Party at least should support. Tim Martin, who's the boss of Wetherspoons, he makes the point that there are 12,500 goods, everyday household goods, that come into this country from outside the European Union on which the EU puts taxes and tariffs. And we could actually make, shoes and underwear and food quite a lot cheaper outside the European Union by getting rid of those barriers. So this is an argument that I don't think gets heard enough. James, let me ask you quickly before I let you go, do you think this deal will get through the House of Commons? I sincerely hope not. I don't think it will. I think that the Brexiteers on all sides should stand up and be counted, and I sincerely hope that our elected representatives do their job. And thank you, Nigel. And will you vote against it in the European Parliament, can I ask, if I may? Well, James, I have been toying with this, and I have been debating this in the coffee room with my colleagues. What do we do when this finally comes to us? About 3 weeks ago, I thought, well, if at least it gets us out of the European Union, even if it's not a very good deal, we'll have to just bag that victory and then we can fight for the rest of it in the years to come. And that was my view. James, having read this thing, having looked at this, having studied this, I think it's so awful that it keeps us trapped, perhaps for many, many years to come, inside some sort of form of purgatory. And I've decided on balance, no, I'm going to vote against. I think this deal is an absolute disaster. It's a betrayal of everything we voted for in Brexit. And if the risk, and you know, Ian Duncan Smith earlier said, look, the legislation's there, time's running out. Even if the risk was that the other side could force us to vote again, you know, they might get away with it, they might not. But even if that's the risk, I right now, James, think that risk is worth it.
Thank you very much. I applaud that. Thank you for your view,
and thanks for your kind words. I'm going to Tunbridge Wells. Claire, a new caller. Good morning, Claire.
Good morning. I just rang in to say that my predominant feeling this morning is I've got the emotion I have is just shame. I'm a Conservative councillor. I've been a Conservative most of my life. I'm ashamed to be a Conservative. I'm ashamed of my party. I'm ashamed of that leader. I'm ashamed that the parliamentary party allowed somebody who was obviously not in favour of leaving the European Union to handle these negotiations. So starting up, she was on the back foot right from the start, and everyone knew she didn't want to leave, and the Europeans knew she didn't want to leave, and they've completely turned us over. I mean, we're in an amazing country. We've got tremendous strengths, a strong economy, and she's just sold us out, and I feel so bad. I organised the Vote Leave campaign in Tunbridge Wells, and we didn't win in Tunbridge Wells. We won nationally, and that was fantastic. But I met so many people who had never voted before, who'd signed up, who went on the electoral register purely to vote to leave the European Union.
I know.
Because they felt so strongly about it.
Yeah, I know.
And those people, and I've seen two ladies walk past just now, past my house, who walk their Jack Russells past my house every day, and I know that they voted to leave. And I feel terrible. I feel I can't face these people because of what this Conservative Party's done. They know I'm a Conservative councillor. I feel humiliated. I could cry. I really could. I cannot believe this woman has done this to us. The Conservative Party has done this to us.
No, I know. Just as in the 1970s, they took us into it without even asking our opinion. I think you fit, Claire, the old Times letters description of disgusted of Tunbridge Wells. Claire, clearly the Conservative Party has been an important part of your life. If you're a serving councillor, you've obviously been out and knocked on doors and worked hard for it. What happens to the Conservative Party if this... I mean, let's say that in the end, Mrs May is able to get this through because Labour abstain. All right, so imagine this. Yep. Imagine Labour abstain, and you get 80 or 90 Tory MPs, plus the DUP, vote against the deal, but she's got a couple of hundred votes in favour. And Labour could easily do this. So what happens if this deal goes through? What happens to the Conservative Party, in your view?
Well, the Conservative Party will be riven in two. The Conservative Party will never come back. It won't come back from this in my lifetime. We'll end up with a Corbyn government, and he doesn't care. We'll end up with a Labour government, and the Conservative Party will be split down the middle. And I also listened to this morning early coverage about all the rioting and demonstrations in France. I have to say, we need to take to the streets. We need to do the same, because this is just... I mean, we fought two world wars. We had the Remembrance Sunday a couple of weeks ago, and we commemorated the people who gave up their lives so that the decisions what were happening in this country weren't being made somewhere else.
But Claire, you can't. Claire, surely you can't seriously be saying to me that you think violent protest will be justified.
Violent protest, but I do think we should take to the streets.
Okay.
I really think we should take to the streets because they're not listening to us. We voted by a majority to leave. And they have not listened to us. They have not respected that. They have not respected the decision of that democracy. If they didn't, they gave us the choice. We voted to leave. It was quite clear we wanted to leave. This is not leaving. This is enslavement.
Can you stay on, Claire? If she wins this, can you stay on as a Conservative councillor?
No, I'm not standing again next year anyway. I'm up for election. I would have been up for election in May, and I'm standing down anyway. But that's for a variety of reasons. This doesn't help, to put it like that. But I will not be a member of the Conservative Party if she wins this.
Okay.
And
Claire.
I just hope to God that another party comes along that I can join. I can't vote Labour.
No, I'm sure. A Tory councillor from Tunbridge Wells voting Labour is quite a long stretch. I do grant you that. Claire, thank you for your call. Well, that was fascinating, wasn't it? That was, a serving Conservative councillor, absolutely ashamed. Couldn't actually look her neighbours in the eyes who were walking their dogs past her house this morning. The French little interview earlier on with Peter Adams caused some comment. This price hike in France of 25% on fuel tax is a tax on the poor. Well, the argument here is that because of the Brussels black hole, taxes will need to go up all over Europe. But there is no black hole, because we're going to go on paying the European Union for years and years and years. It's not just 39 billion. With the extension to the transition period, it's going to be more like 60 billion. No black holes in Brussels. No wonder it's all smiles here this morning. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, here from the European Summit, and it's 11:15. Well, Mrs May's now got to take this fight to Parliament, and she's doing it through the country. She's put an open letter out to all of us, appealing, telling us we've got to get behind her Brexit deal, do it for the good of the country. Go to lbc.co.uk and read the contents of that letter. Is it going to get through the House of Commons? What will happen? Michael on Twitter says, morning Nigel, Leave voters did not vote for Theresa May's deal, and Remain voters said this would happen. We're essentially abiding by EU rules without a place at the table. An indefinite transition. I'm surprised Leave voters aren't campaigning for a people's vote. Well, I have had one or two callers, actually, Michael, on the Leave side saying, yeah, let's fight this again, let's really beat them next time. But you won't see Leave voters strongly campaigning for a second referendum, because as Ian Duncan-Smith pointed out earlier, there is an EU Withdrawal Act that is in British law that says we're leaving regardless on the 29th of March next year. Article 50 expires then too. Now, it's not impossible. That could be opened up. But I think that's the position that we will get from most of the Brexiteers as we have it in law. Whether that's right or not, we'll see. Grant says, I'm sick of people feeling sorry for Mrs May. She's determined to do things her way and blow what the little people think. She's also well paid to do her job. Grant, I've heard this so many times over the last few months. People saying they feel sorry for Mrs May. Well, as I said earlier on, she wasn't press ganged into this. She made her own decision. She wanted to become Prime Minister. And I just, this idea that we feel sorry for our leader, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. I want to respect our leader, whether I like them or not. Matt is calling from Reading. Good morning, Matt.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. Following on from your point there about the second referendum.
Yes.
I would like you on air to the nation to prove and validate your position that 17.4 million people all voted for a hardcore WTO-style no-deal Brexit.
No,
Nigel. Nigel, you keep saying, you and people like you, keep saying the people voted to leave.
Absolutely.
End of, right?
Absolutely.
Now, I don't like Theresa May's deal. I'm a Remainer. I don't like it, okay? But it is a form of leaving. Now, you might not like it. You might not like that version of leave, but the point that we as Remainers always made right from day one is that leave could look like so many different things, and there was never a unified position. You and Johnson and Mogg might have had a unified vision of what leave looked like, but Gove doesn't, because Gove is supporting Theresa May's version of what leave looks like, and he was an ardent leaver. So how, when you and Gove, who are both on the same side of the coin, how can you sit there in your comfy studio and tell the nation that leave means leave when leave means leave for two different people? Leave
well, I tell you
leave
what,
for you, it's one type of leave.
Matt,
and for Gove,
I don't remember.
It's another type of leave.
I don't remember in the campaign, Michael Gove and I don't remember at any point Michael Gove and I disagreeing on things during the referendum. Look, leaving was to leave. We understood. Hang on, Matt. You've asked a lot of questions. I'm going to answer one of them now. We accepted the legitimacy of Article 50. All right? We accepted that we would be leaving 2 years after Article 50 was triggered. The terms upon which we left, of course, there were different permutations, free trade deals, WTO deals, all sorts of different permutations. But the point really, Matt, is this, that what she's done with this is beyond anything I could have thought of during that referendum campaign. This is literally Brexit in name only, and we're not really leaving at all, because we're going on paying the money, we're going on with open borders for many, many years to come, we're going on with the ECJ ruling over trade disputes. So, Matt, my argument is this is Brexit in name only, and that's why I'm so unhappy with it.
But you still haven't answered my question, Nigel.
Well, there were so many of them, I can't remember which one you wanted me to answer.
My simple question was, I was basically saying you cannot validate the 17.4 million people vote, because you and Gove represent that vote, and yet you oppose each other in the fact that you don't support Theresa May's deal and he does. So your Brexit vote, Nigel.
At the time, Matt, there wasn't a cigarette paper. There wasn't a cigarette paper between Michael Gove and I.
It matters now, Nigel. It matters now.
No, we're talking about... No, Matt. You've got this all the wrong way round. You're talking about the motivations of 17.4 million people, and I'm telling you...
No, I know what the motivation of 16.2 million people was, Nigel. 16.2 million people all voted to remain in the European Union, and I can stand by that. It was a truly unified vote. It had the largest share of the vote in this referendum.
Do you feel that we're missing out, Matt? Do you feel if we leave that we're missing out on the benefits of a single European army and things like that?
Well, compared to this deal, if you're going to take this deal or a no-deal Brexit, then yes, I do.
So sign up to the European army, sign up to the European currency.
Why not?
Governed by no. Listen, there is an argument for the United States of Europe. Absolutely, there is, and my friend Mr. Juncker and people believe in it, and there are people in our country that believe in it. But I tell you what, if we went to the 16.2 million, and we asked them how many of you want this to be a United States in Europe, I bet you'd find yourself, Matt, in a very, very small minority. Matt, you've had a fair crack. I'm going to move on. I'm going to go to Tim, who's a new caller from Stirling. Tim, good morning.
Nigel, you're wrong. This is not Brexit in name only. It is much, much worse.
Okay, I would accept that, yeah.
If this deal gets through, we are going to get absolutely crucified because we've got no negotiating position. They can sell us their wine tariff-free. They can sell us their cars. They've got us completely locked in where they want us. And why would they agree to anything on that washy wish list that's been drawn up?
Oh,
because
the child's wish list of Father Christmas. Yeah.
Exactly,
I mean,
they've got everything already. The only two objectives they have got now is to make an example of us, and they do that by humiliating us over the next 2 or 3 years as we beg and plead for everything on that wish list, and they just keep saying, no, actually, we will have to maybe a fish. Actually, you'll do exactly what you want to make free trade deals with other countries. Well, I think we've got a veto on that, actually, so no, you won't be doing that. And the other thing that they'll want is more money. So they're just going to drag it out as long as they possibly can, because every year they tag on to the extended transition period. Another £10 billion in their bank account.
Well, it could be, no, actually, Tim, it's going to be more than that. The Financial Times estimate that our gross estimate for 2021 will be 25 billion euros. Now, I wonder how much of that we're going to start. I wonder how much of that will actually come back in future. So it'll be a lot more than 10 billion, Tim. It'll be a lot more than 15 billion, Tim. It'll be getting up 17, 18 billion, I would think, something like that per annum. Tim, our Parliament, and listen, I completely understand what you're saying. We are at their mercy. It is the worst deal in history, all right? Is Parliament going to reject this, Tim, in your view?
How can they put it through? Because I see it as a sovereignty issue now. If Parliament does put this through, then basically they're tying the hands of future Parliament. I don't see how that can be legal. So I would have thought there'd be some opportunity for some sort of legal challenge, like what Gina Miller did, but on the Brexiteers side. Because how can they tie future government's hands, because we're just locked in.
Well, that would be deemed unconstitutional, Tim, and I totally agree with that. Tim, thank you for your call. Well, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker has said, despite pressure from the UK on member states, they managed to maintain unity. Not enough pressure, I think, actually is the truth of that. And European Council President, everyone's a president here, Donald Tusk, said, regardless of the outcome of Brexit, we will remain friends. And outside the summit, anti-Brexit protesters are making clear their opposition to the divorce deal. Yes, I did actually walk through a number of them this morning. I think we just about kept the conversation on civil terms, but it wasn't that easy. They're pretty passionate. And actually, you heard that from Matt in Reading. Matt wants a European army. He wants a United States of Europe. And that's fine. People can believe that if they want to. But I promise you that of the British population, the number of people who really want to be in the European Union, as it is and where it's going, it's way fewer than 20% of the population. And that is the truth of it. I am going to Birmingham to speak to John, another. And by the way, folks, you know, it may not be easy to get through because it's busy on 0345 6060 973. But, you know, we do welcome people we've never spoken to before. And actually, only two of you so far in an hour and a half have we ever spoken to on this show before. So, you know, if you want to have a go, please do. John from Birmingham, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nigel. I'm a first-time caller.
Yeah, welcome.
And I voted Remain.
Yep. But
this deal that Theresa May has signed is an instrument of surrender. It's just complete surrender. We're paying money in. We're getting nothing back. You know, it took 40 minutes. The EU, they're all high fives, you know, congratulating each other. Spain's coming with demands.
Yep.
The French are coming for these extra bits. You know? and you were talking about having to pay, you know, billions.
Oh, yeah. I was.
In junior relationship, we're setting rules. We're paying for all these things that we don't want to have. They're making a European army now. We're going to have to pay for it. I'd rather no deal. I mean, I'd rather no Brexit, but if that...
No, well, John, I tell you what, John, and I'm sorry, your phone line's rubbish, but from your perspective, yeah, it's either no Brexit or it's no deal. Is it very interesting? Call from a Remainer. I thank you. The line was absolutely rotten. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from a summit here in Brussels, and it's now 11:30. Well, here in Brussels, press conference going on. Jean-Claude Juncker, Donald Tusk and Michel Barnier are taking journalist questions. And Juncker has just said that the agreement on Gibraltar is good for Spain. I bet it is when we find out the real details. And I was asked here about Gibraltar. Over 93% of people there voted to stay in the EU. I'm sure they won't be disappointed if they're tied to Spain. Actually, they will. The Gibraltarians are in this bizarre position. The reason so many of them voted to remain part of the European Union is they fear Spanish reprisals. They fear the border going back to the old days of Franco, with it being incredibly difficult to get across. Although the truth is, even as EU members, the Spanish often make that crossing very, very difficult. So a really anomalous position that Gibraltar finds itself in. Clearly, any future trade deal is not going to involve them unless the Spanish say yes. Although I'm surprised the Spanish have got time to talk about Gibraltar. They're so busy putting in prison people who object to them up in Catalonia. But hey, that's for another day. And Jean-Claude Juncker's big statement is, this is the best deal possible for Britain. This is the best deal possible for Europe. This is the only deal possible. And I think what you're hearing there is, if the British Parliament rejects this deal, and the numbers suggest that it will, but hey, this is politics and things can change, that the thought of the British Prime Minister coming back here before Christmas to renegotiate this, I promise you folks, it's for the birds. I think it really is this deal or head towards no deal. But if we head towards no deal, a lot may change. Let's go to a new caller in Shrewsbury called Catherine, who is a Gibraltarian. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning, Nigel. Thank you for having me.
Not one little bit. So how do you see the overnight concessions to Spain, Catherine?
Mostly, I think most of my fellow country people are absolutely shocked. Absolutely shocked about what this will mean. I mean, for the first time, the British government have said that a deal that will possibly be arranged for the UK in the next couple of years will not automatically result in Gibraltar getting the same deal. Now, that is in effect giving the Spanish government a carte blanche to do whatever they like with us. Literally, they could close the border on us until we decide to give up and surrender to them into a co-sovereignty deal of some sort. I mean, as you have quite just rightly said, look at what they did to the Catalan government when all they wanted was to hold a referendum. Yeah. Now, we held a referendum. We held a referendum because the Labour government forced us into having a referendum because they wanted to give co-sovereignty to the Spanish government a few years ago.
Was it 98% or something?
The referendum said 97% said no.
Yeah. No, I do remember that very well. Well, it is remarkable, Catherine, that in her desire to please the European masters, she sold out the sovereignty of Northern Ireland and Gibraltar.
I never thought a Tory government would do that. I really didn't. I'm a Tory party member. A Tory party member. I have voted. I campaigned in favour of Theresa May in the last election, and I sent a letter of resignation to my party last night.
Did you?
What they've done to the Gibraltar government. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, they're not very Tory in many ways, is what some would say. So, Catherine, how much damage do you think this deal... I mean, let's supposing she gets this deal through. You know, I spoke to... Well, I know, but let's just sort of, play the game here for a moment. I spoke to a Conservative councillor in Tunbridge Wells earlier, serving councillor, absolutely appalled by this. Just how much damage would this deal, if it went through, do the Conservative Party?
I think the Tory Party will be split in two. It will absolutely result in a Labour government in the next election, I feel, because, certainly I won't be voting Tory. I have no idea who I'm going to vote for at the moment. I certainly won't be voting for Corbyn, but absolutely no way will I vote, certainly if Theresa May must resign. There's no way I'm voting for her in the next election.
No, I think
many Tory members will feel the same.
I think as a Gibraltarian, Catherine, you've made that pretty plain. Thank you very much for picking up the phone to us this morning. Jim says by text, why does everyone talk about keeping everybody happy? The Remainers aren't supposed to be happy. Well, I do know what you mean, Jim. One side did win the referendum. It was promised implementation, and it's just not really getting it. Let's listen to Donald Tusk a few moments ago at the press conference.
Today, the European Council endorsed the agreement on the withdrawal of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland from the European Union and the European Atomic Energy Community. The European Council invited the Commission, the European Parliament and the Council to take the necessary steps to ensure that the agreement can enter into force on the 30th of March 2019, so as to provide for an orderly withdrawal.
Well, there we are. Donald Tusk seeming happy about this, but it's quite a big if, isn't it? If it gets through all these next parliamentary stages. George is a new caller on the Caledonian Road. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Nigel. So I'm an EU citizen and I've been living in the UK for the last 5 years. I feel that the deal that Theresa May has brought is actually fair and balanced. We don't have to agree on this. And I feel that the results of the referendum were non-legally binding. So this is probably the most fair deal that she could bring to the Parliament. With that being said, though, I think that you and other Brexiteers, and of course the architects of Brexit, you had the opportunity and the time to discuss with us what your ideal version of hard Brexit would look like. And I'm still very confused about that. Because
there was no hard Brexit, George. There was no hard Brexit. Then nobody discussed hard and soft Brexit. This was just an invention.
What does your no-deal agreement look like? Because I feel that you're trying, along with other politicians, to somehow torpedo a fair deal that could lead us into uncharted waters.
George, 90% of global trade is done on WTO terms. All right? So, all our business with China, all our business with the United States of America is conducted along those lines. Now, the inconvenience of it is tariff has to get charged, although we could unilaterally, waive tariff, I suppose, and whether that complied exactly to the rules, well, it would take them years to catch up with us. What I would like to see, George, is us use this as an opportunity to become genuinely a trading nation of global influence, which I don't believe we can do as members of the European Union. But either way, George, you think this deal is fair. Is it your assessment that she will get this deal through the House of Commons?
She won't. I think that the deal is fair, and the government had 2.5 years to prepare this while negotiating. So it's a failure, unfortunately, that people are against it now, and of course MPs won't vote for it. But it's really surprising that they won't vote for it, while at the same time they vote to discuss the consequences of a non-deal scenario. So people are not aware of what's going to happen next, and nobody seems to be focused on that. Do you want to tell us what's going to happen next if this deal does not pass?
Well, if this deal does not pass, legally, we go for a negotiated no deal. And by that I mean, George, we talk about how we're going to collect tariffs back and forth, at Dover. And of course, nearly all of this is automated these days, as you well know. The problem is, George, I sense that if we get to that, the real story is going to be the attempt in Parliament to unpick that legislation and to try to force a suspension of Article 50 upon us. And I think that's the next big saga that we face, in my view. Because I don't think, George, that much of our Parliament just accepts Brexit. And that is the undemocratic and wrong thing about it. And you said at the beginning of this conversation that the referendum wasn't legally binding. No, but it was morally binding when the government writes to every house in the country, and says we will abide by the result. George, I'm going to have to run back over to the press room to speak to LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood. Theo, hello.
Hello, good afternoon. The Juncker clip was the absolute key clip from that, Nigel, when he looked down the barrel of the camera and he told British MPs, if you're not going to vote for this, don't do it, because you think that Mrs May might be able to come back and get a better deal, because that, Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, said wasn't going to happen.
Good deal, sad deal, not the deal itself, but the Brexit is a sad moment for the European Union, and I want to say for Britain too. Future history will prove this. This is the best deal possible. This is the only deal possible. I'm convinced that those having to ratify this deal, and in Westminster and in the European Parliament, will have this in their minds when they are taking their individual decision. Every member of the European Parliament that very day where this comes for ratification is Europe. Everyone individually. The same applying to the members of the House.
That was Jean-Claude Juncker speaking just a few moments ago, and now we're just waiting for the Prime Minister, Theresa May, to come in front of the podium upstairs and give her press conference to the British media.
OK, Theo, thank you. As soon as that happens, please, we'll get back in touch. Thank you. Well, there's Juncker. It's the best deal possible. It's the only deal possible. And, as Theo Usherwood just said, the message to MPs is, this ain't going to be renegotiated. Take it or leave it. I wonder what they will do. At the moment, all the arithmetic suggests it won't get through Parliament. We'll see. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. We're live from the European Summit in Brussels, and it's 11:45. Well, the EU bosses have spoken about this deal and made it very, very clear. This is the only deal on offer. Please don't come back and renegotiate, because we will not want to talk to you about that. And we await the Prime Minister's press conference, which could happen any time soon. Is this deal going to get through the House of Commons? Linda on text is pretty angry. She says Theresa May has kicked and punished the people of this country by giving this awful regime everything they want. Well, certainly our Gibraltarian caller felt that overnight we'd done the same there too. Maybe, Steph says, if they take Gibraltar, we should invite Catalonia to join a new European trading group with the UK, an association, if you will. If Spain annexes Gibraltar, we encourage Catalonia for Spain. I'm not sure this is very constructive, Steph, although it is astonishing, I think, to see the Catalans, or certainly a very big number of Catalans, wanting separation from Spain and all being put in prison. Really quite worrying. What on earth are we doing in political union with countries that behave like this? Hey, let's leave it. Matthew is a new caller from Ballon. Matthew, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. Yes, there's 2 points I'd like to make. The first one is a bit of a likely impact of Brexit on the mood of the nation, which is sort of kind of obvious in one respect. And the second point I'd like to make is a prediction around what's going to happen in this no-deal deal situation. Now, the first point, the long view, what's the sort of likely impact on the mood of the nation? Well, I think it was only ever going to be a negative net effect. I think it makes me think about the famous British philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who developed a framework for how do you assess whether a policy or political decision is good or not. And his criteria, the key criteria, was you try and maximize happiness and well-being, and you try and minimize misery and pain. And it's all about the net effect, and it was all about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Well, I would say that the Brexit thing fails on such a spectacular level when you apply that criteria, because
really,
basically, because half the nation doesn't want it. Half the adult, probably with the best will in the world and the best evidence, we can't be absolutely sure, but it's probably 50% of the people don't want it. And so when they look at the mess that we're in, their only conclusion is negative.
So what if, Matthew, in 5 years' time, we're out of this, we're independent, we're doing well, we're becoming quite a significant global force trade-wise, we're diversifying more around the world, and the European Union is in massive internal turmoil because the voters all over Europe are rising up against their dictatorial power here in Brussels, and the EU is imploding upon itself. I think we'll say to ourselves, that was a great escape.
Nigel, that's super hypothetical. Is it?
Is it, Matthew? Well, is it with the Italian government where it is? Nigel, with the Poles having had voting rights removed?
You're trying to describe.
Well, so are you. So are you.
Years' time.
No, well, so are you. You're telling us our mood will be worse because of Brexit. Nigel, I don't buy that.
I am. I'm not doing something hypothetical. I'm doing a fairly, I would say, an assessment on what is happening in the here and now. Half the people in this country are not happy with. They weren't happy with Brexit, and they're even unhappier with what's happened at the. And the other half of the people, because there was no clarity at the time of the vote on what the Brexit looks like, all the people that voted out, almost every single one of them has a slightly different view of what exit and Brexit actually means.
As do Matthew, as do people staying in. No, when you voted to stay in, right, and I told you it meant there'd be a European army, you all said I was talking rubbish. Now it's clear. So look, there is dynamism on both sides of an argument. But Matthew, make your prediction for what you think is going to happen.
To do with the current impact and the mood on this nation. It really hasn't. Just let me finish this point. The second half of the people who voted Brexit, there are so many different views. Nobody can be sure on what anyone thought was going to happen when they were voting Brexit, because you've got this full spectrum of hard Brexiteers, no deal people. None of the chances of any of them being satisfied with the deal was very, very slim, because there was no obvious plan.
But this deal.
So just let me finish this point.
Listen, I'm running out of time, Matthew. I'm going to give you 20 seconds quickly to predict what's, because I've got to get in the press room. Yeah.
Okay. Second point is, no deal is never going to happen. It would wipe out the Conservative Party. It would be seen as an abject failure. And nobody in the country, I'd say it's a very small majority. I saw an IOD Institute of Directors poll, and 66% said no deal would be negative to their business. I heard the chairman of Siemens says he couldn't see how he could run his business in a no-deal situation.
Yeah, and we heard that from them. And we heard that from them about joining the euro, didn't we? Matthew, we've got to go. I'm going to go to Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, who is now in the press room, Mrs. May's press room. Hi, Theo.
We are a couple of moments out from when Theresa May is going to enter into this packed briefing room on the upper floor here at the Justice Lipsius building, and she is going to address the British media and European media who've all crammed in here for what is the main press conference of this summit from the British Prime Minister. I'm told we're literally a couple of minutes out from the Prime Minister. She'll give a short statement about the deal that has been agreed both on the withdrawal agreement and on the political declaration. Then she will take 3 or 4 questions, a couple from the British press and then a couple from the European press on her deal. And it'll be interesting to see how she reflects what Jean-Claude Juncker was saying in his press conference with Donald Tusk, that this is the only...
Well, Presumably
deal on offer. It doesn't get better than this.
Presumably she echoes that, doesn't she?
She has to, and then it raises the possibility, doesn't it, of either a no deal or a people's vote, a second referendum, and the possibility of coming back here in December, MPs having rejected the deal and trying to fight for something different. Donald Tusk was quite interesting. He wouldn't speculate, the President of the European Council, he wouldn't speculate when he was asked briefly on what would happen if the House of Commons rejected the deal. They didn't want to lecture MPs, Juncker said that, but they wanted it to be made clear that there wasn't something better. There wasn't something the British Parliament could fight for that would somehow improve the terms of Mrs May's deal on the withdrawal agreement. That just wasn't possible.
No. OK, Theo, thank you very much. We'll come back to you as soon as Mrs May starts to speak. Trini says by text, I bet May has given away fishing rights to Spain. Oh, Trini, we did that years ago. The Brexit was about taking it back, and it appears that we're very reluctant to do so. Michael is a new caller in Manchester. Good morning, Michael.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Okay-ish. So, Michael, does she get this deal through? Is it, this choice? If we don't accept it, we're going to head for disaster. That's what we're going to be told in the next few weeks, Michael.
Well, first and foremost, Nigel, I need to say that I voted to stay in.
Yep.
But I've got to say the deal is the worst of all worlds.
Yes.
When I see this deal, I'm mindful of what Margaret Thatcher said. If you walk down the middle of the road, you get hit by both sides.
That's right. Well done. Well done. It's very good.
And I just feel that it is such a divisive issue. She should have gone in, despite my own views on staying in and the benefits of that, she should have gone for the hard Brexit route simply because I wouldn't have agreed with her, but she would have delivered on the verdict.
Should we call it, Michael, should we call it a clean Brexit? I prefer the word clean. Yeah, that's
clean.
So we all choose words to suit our arguments, don't we?
Absolutely. But, you asked about my prediction. I think there is no way this will be passed in the House of Commons. I'm often mindful of what Ted Heath did, using his powers of persuasion to the pro-European Labour MPs.
To
get his deal through.
Well, he managed, and she's going to have to try the same thing. Michael, we're out of time. Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm back in London tomorrow at 6. At 3 this afternoon, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.